Today, we'll talk about methods of creating resilient gardens. Why is the topic of resilient gardens important, and why are we hearing more and more about this topic? Climate change is affecting plant survival and plant community survival. Unpredictable and extreme weather can damage, weaken, and even kill plants that used to thrive in a particular region. Pacific rhododendrons shown here are one of the popular garden plants that used to thrive in Pacific Northwest gardens, but recently many have died from stress of high heat events and drought. Another major scientific concern is the global loss of biodiversity, loss of species, and population declines. One of the main reasons is loss of wildlife habitat, wetlands, forests, and the transition of lands to urbanization and agricultural lands. Because of this loss of plants and plant diversity, we are seeing steep declines in insect populations, insects that we rely on to pollinate crops and provide food sources for wildlife species. Practices in gardens can make a difference in restoring habitat and insect populations. What do we mean when we talk about garden resilience? Resilient gardens in a community of plants that survive over time. Plant communities that can recover from severe heat events, periods of drought, high winds, and extreme rain events. There are gardens that can adapt as the environment changes, and we as gardeners can make choices that steer a garden towards resilience. When considering creating a resilient landscape, it isn't just about choosing the right plants, but considering how these plants interact with the elements around them. It's about understanding and managing the entire garden ecosystem. Creating resilience is about creating a diverse landscape that buffers plants from disturbances so they in turn protect us and other life that depends on our gardens for survival. How I like to think of ecosystems that they are communities of organisms, both in the soil, wildlife, which depends on plant for survival. Healthy soils are not compacted. Healthy soils have a structure that holds water on the landscape, has air pockets that contain oxygen, which plants, roots, and soil organisms need to live. Healthy soil includes fungal networks that help make nutrients available for plant growth. Without access to the energy from sunlight, the plants would be unable to photosynthesize food, and so the cycle goes. By understanding how all these elements in a garden interact, we can take actions as gardeners that enable and promote these interdependent relationships. One way to help develop the features of a resilient garden is to think about what functions take place. Water is stored on the land for the survival of plants and organisms. Shade is created by layering plants with those that have adapted to shade conditions, thrive as ground covers beneath layers of shrubs and trees. Carbon is stored in plant materials, significant amounts in large trees and undisturbed healthy soil. Carbon is pulled from the air by the plants, and other nutrients, nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, are taken up through root systems in forms that can be absorbed by interdependent relationships of plants, bacteria, and fungus. Resilient gardens protect biodiversity, providing food and shelter to wildlife and people. The greater the diversity of species in a garden, the greater its resilience. If you have only one species of plant in a garden, for example, and a pest outbreak occurs or a heat dome kills a heat intolerant plant on a landscape, the landscape is no longer a garden. If you have a wide diversity of plants, even if one species does not survive an extreme weather event, others will adapt to fill in gaps. That's the definition of resilience. The greater the diversity of soil organisms that decompose plant and animal materials, the more nutrients become available to plants, which in turn provide flowers and leaves for habitat and food for a diversity of creatures. Importantly, as you will learn more about later in this presentation, having a wide diversity of native plants supports a diversity of insects, supporting both predator and prey populations, as you'll see here. As this aphid population increases, so does the population of its predator, shown here, this aphid fly larva. If we artificially decrease the aphid population using pesticides, its population would fall, as would the predator population, because it has no food source. The prey population is quicker to recover, so we will see more pest damage if we do not maintain an ecosystem that supports a balanced population of insects. And so it goes up the food chain. The greater the diversity of nectar and insects and seeds that are produced, the greater diversity of wildlife these gardens support. When you are considering what plants you want in your garden, consider what functions different types of plants provide and what you are looking for. For each function, if you want shade, um, and to protect, if you want shade, protect and care for big trees. Select species that offer visual appeal in addition to providing food and habitat. Select plants that bloom at different times for visual appeal and to support wild pollinator species. Select varying heights, providing habitats to different birds and mammals. Perhaps you want a barrier to a neighbor or a street. Consider the depth of the root system so that you optimize water infiltration, water storage, and create a living soil system underground. Again, we are talking about thinking about the entire ecosystem when we design and care for our gardens. Today, we will provide 5 examples of resilient gardens. Here is a resource guide that you can refer back to that are resources specifically on garden resilience. This list will be sent to you. Here's our first case, a woodland garden. It is one of my favorite landscapes. If you have large trees on your landscape, this may be a great ecosystem to consider. Here we talk about native plants or adapted plants. Native plants refer to plants that have evolved in a specific region, or adapted plants that have moved in from nearby regions, which is happening more and more frequently with climate change. We are focusing on plants here that are adapted primarily to the northwest section of Oregon and southwest Washington. However, the process that we're talking about here of designing resilient gardens is applicable anywhere. We focus on native and adapted species because they, by definition of being native, are resilient, meaning that they survive with little attention in their current environment. They are adapted to the Pacific Northwest climate, which has hot, dry summers. They have adapted to local soils. And because they have adapted to summers, typically with very little rain, they survive in many cases with little supplemental water in summer. As summers become hotter, watering during extreme periods does become more important, however. Plants must be watered also well to become established. A guide is watering well for a minimum of 1 year for perennials, 2 to 3 years for shrubs, and 3 to 5 years for trees, depending on the species and the planting size at planting. When watering, water deeply and infrequently so roots grow more deeply to reach the water and don't have to spend their energy searching for water. For a shade garden, think about planting the garden in layers. Insect and wildlife populations evolved in parallel with native plant communities, so they depend and thrive in gardens that are planted with at least some native plants. By restoring these landscapes, we are helping restore biodiversity of the region. When we think about diversity in also terms of vertical structural diversity. meaning big trees, small trees, and large shrubs. Underneath those ferns, flowers, grasses, and ground covers. And the denser the planting, the greater the diversity and the wildlife species supported. Keeping big trees healthy is important to maintaining a shady woodland garden. If you are unsure how to assess the health of big trees, consult with an arborist with experience in maintaining the health of large trees, and particularly if you're in an urban environment where trees are growing close to houses, consult with an arborist who is familiar with those situations. Then map the sun and shade areas of your garden. It's also wise to understand your soil before you plant. Some urban soils are backfilled after construction and soils may be compacted. They also may be very shallow and lack organic matter. Later in this presentation, we'll learn some soil improvement tips. Before beginning to plant, remove invasive weeds. Once removed, add deep layers of arborist wood chips to help deter regrowth. Arborist wood chips are ground up wood pulp, not the barks of trees. Bark of trees has waxy materials in it that repel water. Wood chips decompose fairly quickly, adding organic matter to the soil. They also hold water on the land and encourage diversity of soil organisms. Protecting big trees is really important to a resilient landscape and garden, particularly in urban areas where much of the landscape is paved over. Trees provide shade, reducing air temperatures. They provide vertical visual structural design elements. Their roots help infiltrate and store water on the land. Through transpiration, they increase the humidity of a landscape. They provide habitat for myriad bird, mammals, and insect species, and they stabilize soils, reducing erosion as they often have wide and complex root systems. Protect your trees and plant for succession. Trees don't live forever, and they take a very long time to grow. Consider what you want on your landscape 10 to 20 years in advance and plant accordingly. Begin by mapping your trees in areas of shade and sun, as these are really critical to then developing the rest of your plan. Start by creating stepping stones or a pathway or trail to avoid soil compaction and trampling of roots, and to give yourself a planting guide. Now, you may not want towering Douglas firs, western red cedars on an urban lot, but if you have room on your landscape in a community space where you work or volunteer, consider planting some large native plant species and trees that are proving to be tolerant of high summer heat and drought conditions. This big leaf maple in my yard is thriving where the western red cedars are showing stress and require frequent deep summer watering. Some other varieties to consider are lodgepole pines, Pacific yew, and western juniper, which is native to eastern Oregon, but is proving resilient on this side of the mountains. All are very large trees to consider that and tolerate dry conditions. Interestingly, lodgepole pines is one example of a big, long-lived species that is adapted to growing conditions and developing different subspecies. One grows on the coast, which is very short and varied from the east tall version of the lodgepole pines. This shows adaptability of a long-lived species, which is really important. These three trees are really quite interesting in that they grow in dry conditions with relatively poor soil and are thriving in areas of Portland that are now classified Zone 9A, meaning that it is hotter than the majority of the rest of Portland. In the middle of the Willamette Valley, ponderosa is a subspecies of ponderosa pine that is adapted to the growing conditions in the Willamette Valley to become its own subspecies, and it is becoming more and more popular as a resilient tree in gardens. Oregon white oak wants no water in the summer once established. They once flourished in the Willamette Valley and are proving to be one of the more resilient big tree species now. Next, add small trees or large shrubs that thrive and can tolerate part shade, part sun, and require little water in summer. Here are some smaller stature trees for small yards. Scholar willow is the most drought tolerant of native willows and will survive well in a yard if given adequate water to establish it and water during the hardest parts of the summer. Similarly with these other small trees. Red osier dogwood is beautiful and can become a thicket if allowed to spread. It provides a great habitat for birds and other wildlife, or it can be pruned to keep it smaller. Here are a few beautiful varieties that are easy to find in plant nurseries and many other nurseries, native plant nurseries and others. They are easy to grow and maintain. My two favorites are vine maple, which has beautiful structure and turns magnificent colors in the fall, and tall Oregon grape that no deer will touch, which in my yard is a bonus. Next, select ferns and small shrubs to begin to fill in the landscape, choosing varying species, textures, and bloom times. These are a few of my favorites, and each produces a unique type of flower, leaf, or berry and create visual interest as well as habitat, particularly when you layer them with herbaceous plants and ground covers. Each of these, again, is fairly easy to find in local nurseries. Perhaps the most fun layer to select are the forbs and grasses. Forbs include a wide variety of herbaceous, non-woody, flowering plants, typically with broad leaves and soft green stems, as opposed to grasses and sedges. Here you can choose your favorite shape colors, and in the resources for this presentation and publication and websites, you can browse through to find options. Each of these will survive in part shade, part sun, and each provides a unique form and hit of color and will spread across the landscape. These are selections of grasses and sedges, which are an important source for seed for birds and cover for other wildlife, in addition to adding contrasting form. Cover as much as the ground as feasible with plants. This will create dense habitat for insects, birds, and amphibians, and keep the grasses and weeds from establishing. Where you can't cover the ground with plants, add mulch and leave some of the ground bare for ground nesting bees. Here are some links to guide you in selecting plants. Next, we'll talk about replacing turf grass lawns with sun plant communities. Why might you consider replacing turf grass lawns if you're aiming for a resilient garden? One, they might look like this or way worse. They are by design monocultures, one or multiple species of grasses, and after 2 or 3 years, they become a mix of quackgrass and other weeds, which can tempt a gardener to use chemicals which can have harmful effects on diversity of a garden. The antithesis, if you will, is diversity and resilience. A low-growing monoculture provides little in the way of food and shelter. And it's really quite easy to remove a turf grass lawn using mulching. The results are quick and leave you with a blank palette for planting. Cut the grass low, layer leaves and compost and top it off with arborist wood chips. The grass is robbed of light and air quickly dies out, leaving you a place to plant in 3 to 6 months. Layering these materials also simulates years of plant and animal materials falling on the earth. So we're speeding up nature's process, improving soil texture and water holding capacity. This is also a great method to build depth of shallow soils. Then plant a diverse plant community, selecting plants that provide the feature and function of resilient gardens. When developing a plant community, think of the layers from the ground up. This drawing is adapted from a method developed by Rayner and West, featured in their book, Planting in a Post-Wild World, which is recommended reading. This gives you a sense of wanting the percentage of structural versus seasonal plants versus ground cover and filler. Here's another way to look at that from a visual perspective. On the base layer, you are covering the ground with ground cover and fillers. You have color-rich seasonal layers and your larger structural layers on top. From a bird's eye view, this gives you a way to think about sketching out your planting space, identifying how many and what type of plants you want where. Also, first identifying a pathway or trail system to guide your planting. Structural plants include small trees or large and small shrubs. They help anchor your design, giving structural and visual height. Structural plants help infiltrate water and store it on the landscape. They provide areas of shade, varying habitat, and can serve as food sources. Here are just a few examples of native structural plants that are sun-loving and require little or no water during summer months. That middle one, a Chief Joseph pine, is actually an adapted subspecies of ponderosa pine, or lodgepole pine, excuse me. Here are some other examples of structural plants, most native to the Pacific Northwest region, and are featured here because they are all drought tolerant. The seasonal plant layer features colors and textures that are attractive to you and ideally provide blooms throughout the season for pollinators. These are all plants native to the Pacific Northwest that attract native bees and provide dramatic and diverse colors and textures. You will learn more about the features and benefits of some of these seasonal plants later in the presentation. Here are a few other examples of seasonal plants that are easy to find. You can refer back to this later. This is a wide variety of ground covers to choose from. Ground covers provide a dense protective layer. Leafy perennials are generally what they are. They provide stormwater management and erosion control. Point raised ceanothus and creeping Oregon grape are two of my favorites. Filler plants are a most important layer to me in a meadow landscape. In order to deter grasses and weeds from taking hold, one way is to outcompete them by planting fast-growing annuals that reseed while providing color and food for pollinators. This is a lacy phacelia that farmers use as ground covers because it grows thickly and attracts wild bees. Here are a few examples of filler plants. Self-heal is a powerful ally when you're trying to keep weeds from invading your meadowscape. After the flowers are gone, it provides a great bright green blanket across the landscape. Here are more resources for filler plants, structural plants, and thinking about designing a plant community. Here, we're going to switch speakers and I will stop sharing my screen.
And let's continue with 3 more examples, beginning with xeriscaping. Xeriscape is also called water-wise, low water, or dry gardening. It could be the solution for one bed or the entire garden. 3 excellent candidates are beds getting extra heat, hell strip, and areas facing south or west. This bed receives extra heat reflected from the wall and pavement. Even after dark, heat continues to radiate. Or you may have a hell strip, that area between the sidewalk and the street. It's usually narrow, unirrigated, and easily abused by people, car, and animals. And walk around the south and west sides of your garden. Areas facing the afternoon sun could be a good fit for a xeric bed. In our region, there is little to no rain during the summer month, and about 30% of household water use is for watering plants. A xeric garden could be the answer to not only water conservation, but also reducing that water bill. And what does it take to make a xeric bed? Full sun, heat, and good drainage. If your soil is compacted, be sure to loosen it. Mixing some organic matter will jumpstart your soil biology and improve drainage. To figure out drainage, dig a hole that's 1 foot deep and at least 1 foot in diameter. Keep the sides straight. Fill with water and let it sit overnight. Next morning, come back and refill it, then begin to measure the depth of water every hour. If your soil drains 2 inches per hour, congratulations, it's perfect. Too slow or too fast need remediation. Less than 1 inch per hour, you can improve drainage by adding compost, mix it into the soil, installing drain tiles, elevating the bed, or choosing plants that tolerate wet soil. If it drains faster than 4 inches per hour, do nothing for a xeric bed. But for other planting, you should add organic matter to increase the water holding capacity. If you have compacted soil, it won't drain well. It also does not have space for air and water to support root growth. It's easy to test compaction. Push a stick straight down and see how far it easily goes. I just use a piece of rebar. And for me, I would want 18 to 24 inches for areas where designated for trees and shrubs, and 12 to 16 inches for smaller plants. If the soil is compacted, we need to break up the soil. You can use a spading fork. It will make vertical channels for air and water to flow through, but it only goes about 10 to 12 inches. If you need to go deeper, which trees and shrubs will need, you're going to have to use a shovel. A shovel is going to be cause more disturbance of the soil. So after you dig up the area and have broken up the soil, leave it alone. And a rototiller in this case is not a good alternative because it does not go deep enough and it can easily pulverize the soil if you make too many passes. When it comes to choosing plants, think about forming a community as Carol had discussed. Uh, Look for different heights for vertical layers, diversity in root architecture to support soil health and water infiltration, and provisions for wildlife such as pollen, nectar, fruits, and nesting materials. Many of the low water plants came from or originated from dry regions of the world or places that are summer dry and winter wet. A plant's origin tells us its growth cycle, whether it needs summer water, and how well it tolerates winter rain. So plants from dry regions, they grow in the summer, get the occasional summer water from rainstorms, and they become dormant in the winter. Plants that are adapted to the summer dry, winter wet areas grow in the winter, get water by the rain, and are dormant during the dry summer. Knowing a plant's origin will help us know whether a plant needs any summer water, and if so, how much. And you'll want to consult several plant lists for ideas for your xeric garden. And as you probably suspected, not all lists are equal. I favor these three sources from left to right. Gardening in Summer Dry Climates is a Timber Press book. The data source they use for drought tolerance is the California Water Use Classification of Landscape Species. The short is WUCL. You'll see more about this. The second source is OSU Plant Trials. Their data source is from field trials over 20 years done in Aurora, which is south of Portland, Oregon. And the third source is Great Plant Picks. Their data source is committees of expert and vigorously a process that vigorously vetting the expert knowledge. I think field trials are the gold standard. And let's look at the OSU studies. Over the last 20 years, OSU horticulturist Neil Bell, and later he was joined by Heather Stoven, tested hundreds of plants. Each trial grew plants over several years and recorded observations. Their test plants received no supplemental water after establishment. And what do I mean? If they planted in the spring, plants receive water the first summer, and then they're considered established. If they planted in the fall, the plants receive no water at all. They were simply watered by winter rain. Then the evaluation began after establishment, and they considered how good the plants look, how well they grew, and whether they had any issues with the pest and disease. Their recommendation look good despite of winter cold and summer heat and drought. So if you want plants needing supplemental water even during the worst heat, the OSU plant trial is your go-to list, and you'll see a link in the resource sheet. Now I want to say a little bit about the California wool coast classification. This is a huge database of water needs of plants. It's led by the University of California faculty and researchers with state and federal funding, and they began in the 1990s. As of today, they have amassed more than 3,500 taxa of plants in this database. So their source of information is a combination of field trials and expert knowledge. I should clarify, their standard for the water needs is for plants to look good and still are healthy, not barely surviving. And the plants I'm going to show you in this slide and the next couple slides are plants classified in the WOCO system as low water needs, which translates to watering once every 2 weeks to 1 month. So here are some low water use trees according to the WOCO system, and some low water use shrubs from the same database. And earlier, I recommended a book instead of suggesting you to go look at their searchable database, primarily because the database is really built for people living in California. So if you don't live there, I think the book is a easier shortcut. Now, switching gear to the Great Plant Picks program, it's an educational program of the Miller Garden in Seattle. Great Plant Picks offers a curated database of more than 1,000 plants for the Maritime Pacific Northwest gardens. They make recommendations based on the vigorous vetting of expert knowledge. And these are some plants from their list of drought-tolerant plants. And these are more from the drought-tolerant plant list. Finally, don't forget the bees. You may know some bees nest in hollow tubes, but 70%, 70, of all bees nest underground, and a sunny, dry area in your xeric bed is just perfect for them. So don't cover the entire xeric bed with mulch. Leave some bare soil to invite the ground nesting bees to share in this garden. And here's my list of resources for this section. Next, let's switch gear and talk about how do we find solutions for our wilting hydrangeas. What do we know about hydrangeas? We know that big leaf hydrangeas are native to cool, moist coastal environment. In the garden, they enjoy morning sun, afternoon shade, and lots of water. Oak leaf hydrangeas are native to woodlands of southeast US. They can take a little more sun and heat and need less summer water. Panicle hydrangeas are from mountain slopes or sparse forests, so they're used to the sun and even less water. We also know water flows from roots through stems and leaves to cool plants. When leaves lose more water than roots can take up, we see signs of drought stress. So let's begin with a honest assessment. Is our hydrangea the right plant choice, in the right place, and getting the right care? Well, just how much water does it take to replace the water loss during those hot summer months? Evapotranspiration measures the amount of water soil loses, some directly from the soil called evaporation, and some through plants called transpiration. This table shows the evapotranspiration rates for some places in Oregon, and it's designed to help farmers plan crop irrigation. I added the green band on the top of the table, and it shows evapotranspiration data from Aurora Weather Station, which is just south of Portland. Take a look at the month of June, July, and August. The amount of evapotranspiration when there is no rain would mean, in order to water and replace the evapotranspiration, we need to water 1.5 inch or more per week. And perhaps that's a good guide for thinking about how much we should water our hydrangeas. Well, what else can we do? We can store more water in the soil. This poster tells farmers 1% increase in soil organic matter means up to 25,000 gallons of soil water per acre. That's because higher organic matter content increases the soil's ability to hold water. Well, the same principle works in gardens when we add compost to soil. We can mulch the hydrangea's root zone to reduce evaporation and moderate the soil temperature. In terms of what to use to cover the soil, coarser materials like arborist wood chips would allow water and air to flow through. But if you use finer materials like compost, it can impede water and air. So OSU recommends if you use coarser materials, you can use a thicker layer, but with the finer materials, you don't want to layer it as thickly. And of course, we can reduce the hydrangea's water loss with shade structures, permanent or temporary. I love the matching golf umbrellas here. If we decide the hydrangea is the wrong plant, we can relocate it or we can replace it. You'll find lots of ideas for replacement in these two resources. They'll also be in your resource list that you'll get. No matter what you choose, few, if any, plants are drought tolerant the day they're planted. When we plant, we interrupt normal growth, and it takes time for roots to recover and restore the normal growth again. Establishment period can take several weeks to several years, depending on the species, size of the transplant, and growing conditions. You can help speed up establishment by planting at the right depth, mulching over the root zone, and giving the plant loose soil to support root growth. And even perhaps more importantly is remember to give it the right amount of water during establishment period. And how much is the right amount? Um, during the summer dry season, the city of Portland has recently has come out with recommendations that homeowners water deeply their trees, beginning with 15 gallons of water per tree per week. So here are some do's and don'ts for watering. Choose a method and time that minimizes evaporation. Coolness in the early morning means less evaporation than midday heat. Deliver the water at a rate that the soil can accept. If it's too much, it can lead to runoff. Water the soil and roots and not the leaves and flowers. And water deeply and less often. And after each session, check to make sure the water has penetrated the root zone. And these are resources for this section. My final example is making a biodiverse garden ecosystem. The garden ecosystem is made up of plants, animals, soil, air, water, sunlight that makes up the environment, and the complex interactions among them. Carol has shared some ideas, and I'd like to add a few more. Nothing adds more diversity to an ecosystem than a keystone species. Keystone species is a plant or animal that has great influence on the ecosystem and affects many other species. Three examples: beavers and the river ecosystem, sea otters and the kelp forest ecosystem, and one we are all familiar with, the Oregon white oak and the oak savanna ecosystem. The map on the left shows ecoregions of North America. Identify your ecoregion, then use the link on the right for a list of keystone plant genus. To drill down from genus to species, you'll need a native plant database. Oregon has Oregon flora. If I put in Quercus, the genus name for oaks, the screen on the left comes up. In the state of California and Washington, there are something comparable. Elsewhere in the US, you can use the USDA plant database, which offers information like those two images on the right. Another idea is to use university research. For example, the OSU Garden Ecology Lab. This lab does research in local gardens and offers valuable tips on plant selection and gardening practices. The colorful graph that you see summarizes a 3-year study comparing 24 species of native plants and 4 non-natives on how attractive they are to bees. Look at that Douglas aster. Who knew it turned out to be such a star, attracting 74 species of bees, acting as a keystone plant for the garden insect community. Other great choices the study discovered include California poppy, a farewell to spring, globegilia, rose checker mallow, Comma Canada goldenrod, Oregon sunshine, yarrow, and Veryleaf facilia. Look at poor lavender. It came in last. Frankly, before this study, to my untrained eyes, lavender appeared to be a bee magnet, but it turned out it attracted mostly honeybees. Well, does this motivate you to plant something from this list? The Garden Ecology Lab folks also found strong associations between certain bees and plants. For example, if you plant farewell to spring, short leafcutter bees will come. If you add Oregon sunshine, you're likely to get confluent minor bees. And the commomatia will bring in Titus sweat bees. This season, I'm growing a huge patch of farewell to spring, and I'm hoping to find short leafcutter bees in my garden. Biodiversity pays real dividends when it comes to keeping the garden ecosystem in balance. Let's think through, how might a biodiverse garden deal with an aphid outbreak? Well, aphids are food for many insects, including the adult or juvenile stage of these critters and many others in the garden. And these critters that control pests collectively are called natural enemies. And now I'm thinking, if only we could grow plants that attract natural enemies, we would have free pest control. Indeed, we can. Garden Ecology Lab found some plants attract high numbers of natural enemies. Specifically, some excel in attracting parasitoids, and others are great at bringing in predators. Predators tend to be larger, think the size of a ladybug to a praying mantis, and they are built to hunt. They tend to be generalist, meaning they eat many types of soft-body insects. These photos of the minute pirate bug is just one example. Parasitoids are small but mighty. Experts consider them even more important than predators for pest control. Parasitoids eat their prey from the inside out by laying an egg in, on, or near a host, and then the hatchling eat the host. This photo here shows a parasitoid wasp drilling through the bark to reach beetle grubs. And this wasp is part of a family of wasps consisting of thousands of species, all parasitoids, and each species specializing on just one host, or should I say, victim. The lethal stage of a parasitoid is often the immature form, doing their job inside the prey. So this photo shows a hornworm caterpillar covered with cocoons. The chain of events began when an adult braconid wasp laid eggs in this caterpillar. Hatchlings ate the caterpillar from the inside. Then they pupate in these white cocoons, turning the caterpillar into a nursery. If you see something like this in your garden, leave it alone. In this stage, the caterpillar does not hurt your plant. Soon, a new generation of wasps will emerge to find new victims. If you're interested in giving a try of this natural pest control approach, the Garden Ecology Lab recommends 6 plants. All of them thrive in dry places with poor soil and need very little, if any, summer water. Let's begin with Oregon Sunshine, number 5 in attracting predators. This plant needs super good drainage and it does well in dry places. If you grow it with no supplemental water, it'll be a 4-inch high mound. And if you water it, it will become 2 feet high. I talked about farewell to spring earlier. It's number 1 in attracting predators and number 2 attracting parasitoids. This photo shows a clump grown during that 3-year study where the soil was dry, poor, and the plants receive occasional summer water. Occasional, it was maybe like once a month. If you grow a farewell to spring in rich soil or with too much moisture, the plant can become leggy and you'll have to support it. And if you plant it, look out for short leafcutter bees. yarrow. Number 5, in attracting parasitoids. This photo shows a wild type. Another good choice is moonshine, which has yellow flowers. According to a recent Garden Ecology Lab study, moonshine has even more flowers than the wild type. Canada goldenrod ranked really high with the predators and parasitoids. The misconception about this plant being an allergy source, it's not true. And there are some complaints about they spread too fast in gardens. Well, it really should be grown with no summer water, and that will keep them in check. Pearly everlasting is number 1 in attracting parasitoids. And if you look at the delicate flower structure, you can see how it matches with these tiny parasitoids. The bonus of growing this plant is it's the host plant for 2 butterflies, American lady and painted lady. If you have this plant, you're providing habitat for them. And our final plant, Douglas's aster, attracting 74 species of bees and many predators and parasitoids. Grow them in poor, dryish soil. If you grow them in an irrigated area, they can get really tall, like 5 feet or more. They have a very long bloom season. Mine started blooming last July and it continued until frost. If you want gardening tips based on research, visit the Garden Ecology Lab. Their website access is shown on the screen and also in the QR code. And currently they have a study on hoverflies, and they have a couple more new exciting studies that are anticipated to begin later this year. Resources for this section. And let me summarize. Garden resilience comes from diversity and health of soil life, plant community, animal inhabitants, and their interactions with one another and their environment. Carol and I believe we can make our gardens more resilient, and we offered you 5 examples today. I hope you found something useful. Let's see if we have any questions.
We do indeed. That was perfect. And I have to confess that some of the questions that I had, you guys did such a perfect job of answering that I've no need to ask them. I'm sure everyone was very satisfied with how you described, particularly preparing soil. Sherry, addressing you, preparing soil for resilience. You did a great job of describing the steps. What would you say is the one most important thing to do preparing your soil for resilience?
Healthy soil needs a lot of space. Space in soil relies on the soil biology, the microbe communities and other critters that live underground, and organic matter is food for them. So we suggest add organic matter as food to jumpstart the soil health because it feeds the microcosm of critters living underground, and then they can do the work for us. Oh, and the other important thing is don't walk on it. That's
Right. Don't
something that
compact it.
I
Mhm.
see people walking on their garden beds, and I just want to push them out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't hurt
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
This one's for Carol. One gentleman said, "Are there native weeds?" And I smiled at that. You know, one man's weed is another man's beautiful flower. Is there a native weed that is nutrient accumulant so that it's essential to the landscape? Are there like for I think about well, I thought about a lot of people consider yarrow a weed because it does self-sow all over your garden. Anyway, any thoughts you have regarding a native weed that might be essential to the diversity of a good garden?
That's a tricky one. Weed by
Yeah,
definition is something that you don't want growing
right.
in a place. And I'd say the difference between weed and invasive plant, which we don't want, or invasive plants, typically were introduced species and they don't have any competition, so they take over and they grow rapidly. Yarrow is actually a pretty good example of a native plant that is excellent. It grows strongly, it'll cover the ground. It's got many beneficial properties. Even Sherry was mentioning it at the end there. I would say if you're looking at native ground cover forbs, many of those are native plants that are beneficial, and some of us would probably call them weeds. Grasses, non-native grasses are problematic. Native grasses are great. Native grasses grow in clumps, so a lot of the ones we talked about are a good choice for providing really deep root systems and food and uh, habitat are created. So grasses, sedges are interesting category.
That's great. That's a good that is an excellent answer. Sherry, this one's for you. One person has a urban lot with 6 Doug fir trees that are 100+ years old and is concerned about what you mentioned about watering. In the past, this person has not watered those trees at all. How close to the tree should they place the water, and how much water should they use during the driest months that we have?
I would say the rule for watering are number one, watch your tree carefully. Look at how well the tree is growing, if it's growing at all, for signs. And the second thing is, especially with established trees, the actively growing part of the roots are around the drip line and beyond. So this person with the 6 mature trees, I wonder if the roots that are growing are actually on his property or
Or a
neighbor's
neighbor's?
property. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
And you don't want to waste your water on areas that's really close to the trunk because the active roots are not there.
right.
Um, so when it comes to how much water, that's a tricky one because it depends on a lot of things. What kind of soil, does it get sun or shade, a lot of other factors. So I think the important thing is look at your tree for signs of health and water correctly, put water in the correct area. And when you do water, make sure that it is delivered deep enough to the root zone. I think those are more important than, exactly how much water are we putting down. So for him, do a watering session around the drip line, maybe like a 3-foot buffer area, a
Mhm.
band, and dig down a couple feet and see if the water is penetrating. And if it is, that's enough.
Great answer. It would be a heartbreaker to lose those 6 very mature trees. But as Carol points out, because I have mature trees on my property too, I'm pretty cognizant of the fact that I need to be planting new trees. These trees won't last forever. I might not be here to see it, but at some point they will not, they'll have lived their life out. So planting new trees is
I just
great.
want to say one thing about watering. If you have 6 trees, I would get some 5-gallon buckets
Yeah.
and drill the hole, like the smallest hole you can drill on the side, maybe like 1 inch above the bottom. And every bucket drill 2, 3 holes on the side, fill it, and just put it in the area that you think the roots are and water
And
that way.
seep. Yeah,
Yeah,
let it seep in.
yeah.
Yeah. And then it won't be too much for the tree to uptake at one time, so you have this soggy ground around you. You guys gave us a lot to think about, and I love the number of resources for where to get the plants that you both described, because native plant suppliers are much stressed to keep up with the demand. People are more and more looking for native plants. So you gave us some great resources, some great ideas. And I know sometimes it's hard for me to turn away from that hybrid that I absolutely adore, but you gave us some beautiful choices. And that's all the questions I have. Nice job, ladies. Oh, and by the way, if anybody thinks of a question after we're done, be sure and send it to the email address in your Zoom confirmation, and we'll get the question answered for you. Okay? All right. Goodbye.
Bye.